Hey guys, this is Dawood with AutoMarketplace. Just wanted to do a less than 10-minute summary ahead of publishing our podcast on YouTube. We've already published it on our Substack, and everything we mentioned, they'll have links in the description below as usual. And so the podcast was with New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, NYC TLC Chair David Doe, and it was done in conjunction with our friends. And we've done about 3 podcasts with them, our friends at NYC Taxi News, Mittleman and Carolyn Protz. And we really encourage people to go to nyctaxinews.com. They just have this incredible archive of information about the TLC industry. So nyctaxinews.com. And Abe has been in the industry. He was a former yellow cab driver since retired, but he's been in the industry since the 1970s, so literally over 50 years. And Carolyn has been in the industry for decades. So just incredible knowledge. And you can follow them on X, I should say, as well, at NYC Taxi News. And Carolyn is at NYC_T-Motor. So we really encourage you to follow those accounts, and we'll be collaborating with them more in the future as well. So getting back to the podcast, and the cool thing about Substack as well, it actually auto-generates a transcript. So you can play the podcast and then follow along. Now, the transcript might not be, perfect, but we think that's kind of cool. Okay. So let's just read these 3 paragraphs, not even the whole thing, just so people get understand what the podcast was about, what was discussed. And then I just want to briefly address one point that we've already got a lot of feedback on in the less than 24 hours since we published it, the podcast on our Substack. So it says, we spoke to NYC TLC Chair David Doe about his recent experiences as an NYC for hire driver, including driving a yellow cab, working in an electric vehicle on Revel's platform, and his future plans to continue driving across NYC, different NYC for hire transport sectors, including black car bases, livery bases, or community car service livery bases, luxury limo sector. So I think everybody thinks that's really cool, and he should be commended for that. Later on in the conversation, he shares some thoughts on how he thinks about and balances the opinions and demands of different groups when constructing and determining policy. We appreciate the complex tasks of being the regulator, especially when it comes to discussions around issuing new TLC plates, a very actively debated topic in the industry, as many of you know. And he also briefly touches on congestion pricing. So the 1-hour podcast, the first 30 minutes, roughly 30 minutes, is a conversation between Abe, Carolyn, and myself with the chair. And then the other 30 minutes is kind of a reaction on the back of the podcast. And we also talk about, very briefly, maybe in the last 10 minutes, an upcoming taxi medallion auction, which we published about, which we wrote about on September 15th. And so we'll cover that extensively. It's coming up, in 2 days now. In any case, that's a podcast. So, we'll let the podcast speak for itself. Please listen, after this summary on our YouTube, or go out on Substack, or go to NYC Tax News and listen to it. But we hope you enjoyed the podcast. And we do thank Chair Doe. And we do appreciate, as we mentioned here, that it's complex being the regulator. A lot of people like to criticize politicians and regulators, but if you're in their shoes, there's a lot of different interests and politics to balance. So, it's very easy to criticize, but, you have to kind of be thoughtful in how you criticize them. So they're not immune to criticism, but you just have to be thoughtful about it. So in any case, in the podcast, we mentioned, so a big contention, and we've been writing about it, and a big debate right now in the NYC TLC industry is there is an expectation that more EV-only TLC plates will be released. And there is, this has been a subject of debate for many years, but it's also coming to the forefront because there might be a new EV mandate. There was a TLC hearing about it. And so a lot of people think a new batch of TLC plates is going to be issued. So let's clarify a few things, and we'll let listen to the podcast and you can get the full context of it. But we just want to address one thing. So in March, and we covered this extensively, there's 1,000 new EV-only TLC plates released. And the first point is all 1,000 haven't been distributed. About 826 to our calculation of the 1,000 have been distributed, because it takes a while. You can win the auction, then you have to get a card, then you have to go to the TLC process. Then someone might not get a TLC, might not be able to get a card, so then it goes to the wait list. So, it's still being distributed. So all 1,000 haven't been distributed, but the vast majority have, about, in our calculation, 825. So first things first. The vast majority, more than 800, were distributed to individual drivers. This is just in the data, and it just seems to be the data is backing that up. So that is factually correct. a lot of people, not only us, you know, in the hallways of the TLC industry, this is what's this pie chart and, you know, this information all is publicly available is confusing to people. Because if you participate in that auction, and we actively covered it, it was over 100,000. I mean, this is a quote: 1,000 EV licenses were successfully filled this month, and more than 100,000 applied for the wait list. And the way it worked, long story short, was it was kind of like you log into a website and you can apply one at a time, and there was like a mad rush for it. It wasn't the greatest process. Hopefully, if they release, hopefully, if they choose to run that process again, it's not going to be run like that. But that was the process at that time. It is what it is. So in any case, this is what's concerning to people, because if you knew how the process was run, it just seems probabilistically improbable that any entity or individual could get more than 1 or 2 TLC plates. I mean, the system was crashing, 100,000 people applied. So again, it's an observation, not an accusation. Observation. So of the minority of plates that got issued to business entities, so TLC says 174 right now. I think, you know, the vast majority of that has been distributed. Hertz has got this big allocation, and Revel has got this big allocation, and that is confusing to many people. Observation, not accusation. So what additionally adds more confusion to what's going on is, so we published this on September 19th. We didn't even know this was coming. Obviously, the mayor had this, you know, and the city had this plan for probably months. So it's not like this is in reaction to our article, and we're not trying to imply that. But September 20th, the day after we published that article, Mayor Adams and Hertz announced a partnership to electrify their fleet. A great initiative. It mostly concentrates on their like normal rental fleet in New York City, I'm sure. But Hertz was never in the TLC rental industry before. And now they've gone this allocation, and that seems confusing. And also, it seems like they've, you know, half of their fleet that they've gone so far is affiliated with Revel's base, half of it is with Uber base. So a lot of people, I'm just saying the quiet part out loud, many people are talking about this. And so that's all we meant. We're saying that this is intriguing. We're not making an accusation, but we're saying this is an observation that many people are confused about. So in any case, we hope you enjoy the podcast. Please let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, in our YouTube or in our Substack, or going to NYC Taxi News, or on Twitter, or X, I should say. And we hope you enjoy the conversation. Thanks a lot for listening.
Hi, this is Abe, and I want to welcome you to the NYC Taxi News podcast, where today our special guest will be Chairman David Doe, the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. Carolyn, can you start the show?
Hi, everyone. You're listening to the NYC Taxi News podcast. This is Carolyn, and I'm here with Abe and Dawood. Today's special guest is part-time cab driver David Doe, who will tell us all about his cab driving experiences in New York City and how the TLC could make his life easier. By the way, his day job since May of 22 is TLC Commissioner. Previously, Commissioner Doe served as the director of the Washington, D.C. Department of For-Hire Vehicles, where he leveraged technology and data analysis to drive decision-making, enhance efficiency, and improve administrative processing. Under his leadership, the FHV department in Washington created a centralized dispatch platform through which residents can summon a wheelchair-accessible taxi, and he also successfully launched a DC microtransit, an on-demand shuttle service to meet travel needs for residents living in hard-to-reach areas. He has an economics degree from the University of California and a master's in urban planning from the University of Maryland. He is now a Park Slope, Brooklyn resident and enjoys riding his bike, going to the gym, and exploring the incredible food scene in New York City. Agree with you 100% on that. Commissioner Doe, appointed by Mayor Adams, dropped into New York City in the midst of numerous problems, including medallion debt, among others. That issue was dispatched with speed and efficiency through the MRP, the implementation of which Commissioner Doe was extremely instrumental. It provided $400 million in debt relief to 1,800 medallion owners. While that was a particular issue involving a cohort of medallion owners, it did not address the larger underlying issues which have yet to be addressed. Perhaps we'll get into some of those today. So, Commissioner Doe, welcome to the jungle. Take it away, Abe.
Okay, and sometimes the streets of New York can be a jungle, but we are always hoping that someday it is not. David, thank you very much for coming on. Okay, and I know you're time limited, so I'm just going to ask you, tell me a little bit about your driving experiences.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Abe, Carolyn, and Dawood for having me this morning. It's I think, an incredible pleasure to be able to be on your podcast and really talk directly to you all. I know that I've promised this for months, and I'm glad that we've been able to put it together recently. And so, thank you so much for having me. Last year I decided to go through the legal process and ask my team, hey, can I actually get a TLC license while still being commissioner and chair of the commission? And they said, well, let's talk to the Conflicts of Interest Board. And lo and behold, they said they had no problems with it as long as I did not collect any tips, fares, or anything along those lines to impact any of my decision making on the board. But look, it was an incredible process. I learned a lot. I learned from both drug testing that we need to make it better for drivers. We need to make it more efficient for drivers to get through that process. I learned about our educational courses. We have to make that a little bit better. But what I learned, which was amazing, was that our team's processing of driver's license is quick and efficient. And so there's all these external factors that take a little bit longer, from background checks to many of the other things that are involved with getting a TLC license. And so it says 24 hours plus a 6-hour wheelchair accessible course, but it's a little bit longer than that when you incorporate all of the waiting time. So that was that part, right? And then I decided, let me drive a yellow taxi. And I went randomly to various garages. I went to one in Midtown, two actually in Midtown that I tried out, the last remaining few that are actually in Manhattan. I tried some in Long Island City, which is where the bulk of yellow taxis are, garages are today. And then I also tried leasing from a couple of folks. And what I've learned is that, that when I sit down with, first of all, when I go and rent, it's not just renting the vehicle, right? Now all the owners of the garages and bases, drivers, want to talk to me. And I sometimes sit for hours, maybe 2 hours, just talking about the industry. And so it's almost like a little bit of a tour that I'm doing across the city, just to understand what base owners, what drivers are going through on a daily basis. But I remember one of my first trips, right? It was in Midtown Manhattan, and it was for a doctor who I think broke his leg. I don't remember exactly. But we talked about quintessential stories that happen in a yellow taxi, and that, the commissioner and chair of the commission driving someone from, Midtown to the Upper West Side was a New York story. And that is what is exciting. And, we just shared our stories about the last 20 years of him being a doctor and how he only uses yellow taxi cabs. And so I just remember that story distinctly. And what is amazing by all of this, right, is that sometimes, in a yellow taxi, everyone wants to talk to you. But when you're driving in a high volume for-hire vehicle, most of the time I'm silent. So, that was one of my first experiences. And then I've also driven from LaGuardia, from JFK, where there are long waits. And then also, I've hung out with taxi drivers at relief stands, at the taxi clubhouse, just chatting about, where are the best bathrooms. But what I always appreciate more than that is where are the best restaurants, and taxi drivers always know where the best restaurants is. And my favorite is a kebab place in Chelsea.
Tell me, is there any one trip that let me ask you this: Did you pick up street hails or just do app calls?
I did mostly street hails, right? And then I also waited in various lines, be it at LaGuardia or JFK, even in the central hold lot that some drivers have had to wait upwards of 3 hours. But I also experienced the new Port Authority app that they just put out, where it was a virtual queue, and so you didn't have to wait 3 hours in the central hold lot. That you could just wait at various locations, go to the bathroom. Maybe some drivers need to do prayers and things like that. So it ranged a variety, and I also did some app rides as well.
And let me just say, in my career, which started in 1970 and finished in 2012, 42 years, I only did street hails because that's all I had. Okay, there was no apps in the taxis until after I was done. The traffic, maneuvering yourself in the traffic is an art to get to the street hails. Okay, and you have to do it safely. Did you have any problem doing these street hails in a safe manner?
Well, I don't want to get any points, and I don't want to go before oath, so I drove incredibly safe. I followed the traffic rules. I even made sure that when and if I dropped someone off in a bus lane, that I would make the immediate right after that, right? But let me say this. As a novice driver, I think I have frustrated some of my passengers because I use GPS. And, Abe, I know that, from your trip to JFK when you were on the real world to Manhattan, you didn't have to use GPS.
You saw that.
I struggled. I really struggled. And so I use GPS. And if you make the wrong turn, if you go off you're now on one of those highways for a long time before you can turn back, and the nervousness, the sweaty palms of trying to be perfect for your passengers, but at the same time you made that mistake and it's so clearly visible on your GPS, it's embarrassing sometimes. But I'm a novice driver. I've only had 12 trips, so we can discuss a little bit about that. That was 12 trips over 24 hours. So that's not a good record. But I think as I become a better driver, I think I'll get more trips.
I just want to say, while I was driving in all those years, I wrote for a newspaper called the Mini Press, and there was one article I wrote about how to drive safely. Okay. And, it took me a long time to learn this. Okay. I didn't learn this in my first year or my second year. But after a couple of years, I realized the best way to look for fares is to stay on one side of the street. Okay. You can say 2nd Avenue or 1st Avenue. Stay on the right side or the left side. Don't stay in the middle lanes. Okay. When you're empty, and let all the other cars pass. Okay. And then I would have the street to myself. And if I saw someone, I could pick them up safely, even if they were on the other side of the avenue. Okay, and that's a tip I like to give all taxi drivers. Drive slow, because there's people that want you no matter whether you drive fast or slow. It's not a contest. Okay? You're merely looking for people to get into your taxi. Okay, so how do you feel about that?
No, that's a great tip. I just remember sometimes the double parking is crazy in Manhattan, actually in everywhere, right? And I just most of the time I'm in the right lane or left lane, both sides, double parked, and then I'm signaling to get out back into traffic, and it happens every single block there's double parking, and it's crazy to me. But yeah, your tip is 100%. I think I'll take that on, and I'll report back to you, Abe.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I just had a quick question. And by the way, thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us, and we really appreciate that. I just had a quick question about what type of car are you driving, and are you returning the car at the garage? Are you doing the day shift, the night shift? Like, how does that look? Have you driven in an EV, for example, or are you planning to do that in the future?
That's a great question. So I've driven in 2 EVs. I've driven in a yellow EV, which was a Model 3, and then I also drove for a high volume, or actually it wasn't a high volume yet. It was a Revel EV, and both were fully charged for me. I typically pick them up at the garages that they're located at.
Oh, and so you've actually done both yellow, like a yellow cab, and you've also done basically base work, that like non-yellow cab for hire trips as well.
That's correct. I have done both, and then my next one, I'm planning to either go back to yellow or a high volume base like Uber or Lyft. I wanted to experience every single base. I want to go also to a more traditional black car base, and then also one day, experience how drivers are doing in Suburbans and Escalades in a Lux limo base. So I want to experience what every type of driver goes through, and so I've done.
What hours did David?
Yeah. So typically, I've done a 6 p.m. to a midnight shift on a Saturday night to experience what was going on, and we saw Robert Downey Jr. in the West Village. I did not pick him up, but he was just strolling out, just like a normal New York City. He is a normal New York City resident, but but not normal when you're a big fan. And so, and I've driven during the afternoon hours from, let's say, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And things like that. So it's all random, but I want to experience all types. I've also promised a base owner in the Bronx that I do a shift with them in the future.
The taxi business in New York is a 24-hour a day business. Okay, in my career, I've driven every hour of the day and night, through the night into the morning. Okay, and it is different to say work between midnight and 6 a.m. Okay, a lot different than working in the afternoon. Okay, it's something you have to experience to know what I think about it. I liked working at times between midnight and 6 a.m. because that's when it gets easy and the trips get longer. Okay, people will come out of a bar, say at 3 a.m. In Midtown Manhattan, say, take me to Coney Island. Okay, I got to go home. All right.
And I think Carolyn may have had a question as well, if you want to jump in, Carolyn.
Yes, I'm still here. Commissioner, it's funny that you would mention getting on a highway and then not being able to get off for a long time, because I think there are many medallion owners and taxi drivers and Uber drivers, et cetera, who kind of feel that way about New York City's policies. It's like once you get on a road, a policy road, it's really hard to get off that road, which brings us to the question of the over 100,000 licensed TLC vehicles, which perform only 800,000 trips a day. Most of the yellow taxis aren't double shifted anymore. That was a very efficient use of a yellow cab that was constantly on the road, constantly picking up trips, 500,000 trips a day. And so why are we issuing more licenses in view of that, especially because of the 5,000 yellow cabs that remain on the shelf?
Well, I think that's a very good question, Carolyn, and one that I'll answer this way. Is before the pandemic, there was 125,000 vehicles. Today, there's less than 100,000 vehicles. What has happened, right, is that, and you're right, that sometimes the regulator, and this is before my time, makes choices that might muddle the market a little bit. What I hear on a regular basis when I visit drivers, when I wait in the taxi hold lot, when I wait in taxi stands, when I visit drivers at various events throughout the city, right, be it both yellow and for-hire vehicles, is that they are stuck in these leases because there's no other way, no pathway to own their own license, right? And so I make sure, right, that I look at the overall data before I issue any licenses. And I think what you're talking about is 1,000 EV licenses that were issued earlier this year. And most of those went to individual drivers. Over, I think, 70 some odd percent went to individual drivers, right? And then others, and we put a portion of that to everyone else. But more so, right, I also want to make sure that outer borough residents have access to for-hire vehicles, and that's why we reimagined the SHL program for outer borough access, right, that do not belong to high-volume bases like Uber and Lyft, that belong to our community bases so that they can serve community residents. And so that is, frankly, where I have to balance both a regulatory approach and a strict cap. And caps, right, made, I think, the overall market a little less efficient, especially for residents in the outer boroughs. And I have conversations about licenses on a regular basis, be it with you, for example, or, members of Congress. And everyone has their own point of view. And as the regulator, I have to make sure that the market continues to be efficient and continues to operate. And so, I evaluate, and that's why we have our annual cap report that we look at on a regular basis to make sure that what we're doing is appropriate and that it is based on data and based on the market as we see it.
Just to follow up on that, and thank you for that honest answer. I know that's a very tricky question to answer sometimes. Focusing on the 4,000 or 5,000 yellow cabs, we get all of us get a lot of questions about what is the current state of those yellow cabs and why are they still in storage? Do you have any insight into why those medallions are still in storage and what's preventing them from being activated? Do you have any insight into that or any thoughts on
Sure.
that?
Yeah, so I'm very proud. I'll answer this in two ways first and then get to the heart of your question. But I'm proud of the TLC and I'm proud of my record on getting MRP plus pass, right? We have helped over 2,252 medallions provide relief of almost $450 million. And then we also, right, for the first time in 10 years, raised the meter rate of fare, right? What that meant was that it put 33% more of the meter box into the pockets of drivers. And I'm also further proud, right, that at the peak, right, of the pandemic, there were 7,500 medallions in storage. Today, 2,800 medallions have left storage, and now about 4,700 or about 5,000 is the number that Carolyn said earlier, are currently in storage. But that's a significant achievement, right, of going from a height of 7,500 to 4,700. And let me also say that there's still work to be done. It's not an easy, I think, task to be the regulator, but also to see and feel the heartbeat of one of the most iconic industries in New York City, and trying to continue to work to make sure that our yellow industry can continue to compete on a fair ground. But we're very proud of our record on this, and we'll continue to work with the industry, listen to the industry, and make sure that we continue to help improve all the industries that we regulate.
Okay, going back to the number of vehicles on the road, you used to have 13,000 yellow cabs on the road, mostly many of which were double shifted, doing 500,000 trips a day. So now you've got over 100,000 vehicles, and I'm including all the different services, doing 800,000 trips a day. I mean, the math just doesn't make sense to have all these vehicles. And then we get to the problem of congestion. Now, I've been at some of the hearings on congestion, where they heard from different people in different neighborhoods. And I can tell you that a lot of people at these meetings said, there's congestion in Manhattan because of Uber. And I don't want to have to pay congestion fees because Uber is cluttering up the streets. I mean, this brings us to the question of New York City culture and what New Yorkers are all about. I mean, 50% of us are foreign-born. The other 50% had parents or grandparents that were foreign-born. So we have our own individual ethnic, religious, regional identities, but mainly our identity is of a New Yorker. And I think that starts even before people get here, because you have to be a certain type of person to want to come here and be involved in all our mishigash. I think New Yorkers think of themselves as a little bit faster, smarter, ruthless, maybe not very nice, and extremely cynical, which leaves you with the very difficult job as a bureaucrat of trying to convince New Yorkers to do things that they really don't want to do. Although you keep, all of you keep trying, it's a problem to sell a policy, to people in New York City, given their cynicism. So, then when they hear about congestion pricing, which, may be a good idea in itself, but then they look at the causes of the congestion and, it sort of turns them off and, lowers credibility on the part of New York City government. I think the mayor understands New York City culture very well. He hasn't talked about it much lately, but he used to talk about people coming in from the outside and not understanding our culture, which city council members sometimes say also, particularly the older ones. So you have quite a job ahead of you, Commissioner, I think. I don't envy you. And I'll also just say this. Every time that there was the possibility of attrition, besides the 20,000 that disappeared after that initial bump once the cap was instituted, the 20,000 jumped in, 20,000 jumped out. But every time there's been an opportunity for organic attrition, somebody at the TLC steps in and prevents that, whether it was going back years, the inspection rules or the retirement rules, or being able to use a cell phone in the car, or driver income rules, or the so-called cap that was finally passed in 2018-19. Every time there was an opportunity that there would be natural attrition, somebody steps in and changes the rules. Like, maybe there would be some attrition now, but there's going to be 1,000 more electric vehicles. And then, there's going to be 2,500 street hail liveries that don't do street hails. And then there's been some agitation on the part of Tech NYC and I think it was one of the environmental groups, I forget, League of Conservation Voters, that the TLC should think about the 3,600 licenses that aren't being used by FHV drivers that are sitting on a shelf, that those should be reissued. So there's always somebody, for some reason, agitating for more cars on the road, which, you just have to go outside and walk around and you'll see that's crazy. There shouldn't be any more cars put on the road. But that's all I have to say.
Well, Carolyn, I think, I agree with you in terms of congestion pricing is that, the yellow industry has paid its fair share, $2.50 in congestion pricing, and then another MTA surcharge of 50 cents. And both industries, and the overall TLC industry, I should say, have paid over $2 billion worth of congestion charges to the MTA over the past few years, right? And so I want to tell the Traffic Review Mobility Board, and I have done so, to consider, what the yellow and what the other taxi industries have contributed to the MTA and to the overall state budget. And so while, like you suggested, congestion pricing is an incredibly important aspect of our city's future so that we can have cleaner air, so that we can have better, less congested streets, and better transportation options overall, right? we need to make sure that the TMRB and by extension the MTA knows the contributions of our industry. So I'll leave congestion pricing at that. I also want to say something that is incredibly important is that while the number of TLC vehicles have dropped from 125,000 to now under 100,000, we are not the main contributor, right, of congestion, because while the number of TLC vehicles have dropped, congestion and traffic has reached and exceeded pre-pandemic levels, and so that's something that is a big concern of mine, and I want to make sure that the TMRB is also considering that it's mostly private vehicles and these big trucks that use our roadways to deliver goods, be it Amazon, FedEx, or UPS. And so I'll leave that there. But it has been such a pleasure to be on the podcast today, and something that we should do again, and we should talk in the future. But I really enjoyed talking about the hot topics in our industry and also my driving experience today. And it was good to be with all of you.
Yeah, I want to say
thank you so much for your time, Commissioner.
Let me say one thing before you go. When I came into the business in 1970, there was no taxi commission. Okay? So out of all of the chair people that took, out of all of the people that took before you took their place, were many over the years, you're the first one to really look at us like we're real human beings. Okay, that we're not underneath their in other words, that you're a level person with us. That you're just one of the crowd. Okay, and you're doing whatever you can to help us, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. I can't tell you how many times. Yeah, and I can't tell you how many times we wished that somebody in your office would get behind the wheel to see what's really going on. Okay, and go ahead. You were saying?
Yeah, no, Abe, that means a lot. And I come from parents who were immigrants, refugees of the Vietnam War, and so they started their own small businesses, just like our 180,000 drivers who are just starting out. They're migrants, many of them. They're minorities, and so I understand growing up what my parents wanted from me is to become. I don't think they ever wanted me to become a bureaucrat, but they know that like many other migrant parents, that they just want to see their children become successful, and so. I see that in many of our drivers, and that's why I want to talk to our drivers. I want to talk to our businesses because, many of them are just trying to strive for a better future. So that means a lot, Abe, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing.
Commissioner. I just want to say that. Okay, sorry, Abe.
Well, no, I just want to say I'm a U.S. Army veteran of the Vietnam era. I wasn't sent to Vietnam. Okay. But it's just part of my history. When you mention Vietnam, I got to say that I was in the U.S. Army during that time.
Thank you for your service. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And Abe drove a tank. Abe drove a tank, which gave him the skills to be a taxi driver later. And I just want to say, Commissioner Doe, that given time, think about it, you may become more like us. Given enough time, you're going to become a New Yorker.
All right, I appreciate it.
It'll be interesting to see your evolution.
All right, well,
David,
keep in touch.
David, thank you for coming on. Okay, and
thank you very much, Commissioner. I appreciate the time.
Okay.
All right, talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, he's really a good guy. Okay, and to be in the position that he's in, okay, is very difficult. Extremely difficult, to deal with all of the different people that want things, or the segments that are against each other.
You know what? We didn't get
Right.
into it because he was talking about outer boroughs, and because there's always this inference that, oh, more than 50% of the Uber trips are in the outer boroughs. But I took a really close look at the numbers on the TLC website because they have the maps, so you could see how many trips were done in every single neighborhood. So if you take Manhattan, and if you take what I call the near abroad, which is like Astoria, Greenpoint, Williamsburg, places close by to Manhattan, Greater Manhattan, and the airports, and you add all that together, that's 80% of the trips. So they're really only doing 20% of their trips in the boonies. 80% of the trips should be our trips.
Well, it's a matter now of how many yellow cabs get on the road. The more yellow cabs that get on the road, the less Ubers will be in Midtown. Okay, because
Maybe.
fare-wise, people are going to get a better deal with the yellow cabs.
Yeah, probably.
Is that correct?
Maybe,
okay.
depending on what happens with congestion pricing.
Yeah, well, I think that what David said was that they're going to fight for us when it comes to.
No, he's going to fight for all TLC drivers, all 180,000 of them, or however many there are.
Yeah, well,
this is another example of there could have been a differentiation between the yellow segment and the rest, and there isn't. There may not be.
I think there's a thing. I agree with. Number one, I think all of us agree that it's good of him to show up, and I think he has definitely good intentions, and he's a thoughtful person. I think in discussing these things, and Carolyn, you asked some really good, hard questions, and I know it's not easy to do that as well. But I think one thing when people analyze the yellow cab industry is where maybe the policymakers are having maybe not connecting the two dots, is that if you're going to issue new TLC, and I think this is Carolyn getting to your point, and also what we've discussed many times, is that when you're determining to issue new TLC plates and the industries are merging, for example, yellow cabs are doing quote unquote e-hails, that term is a very political term, but basically they're doing hails via an app. So if those for hire trips can be serviced by yellow cabs and can be serviced by Uber and Lyft and can be serviced by bases, the industries are merging. And so there's this disconnect, and it's kind of to your point, there's this disconnect, I think, with many policies, not even a disconnect, there's obviously politics behind it as well that they have to answer to. But it's kind of like, well, if you issue a TLC plate when there's 4,000 or 5,000 medallions in storage, please explain to us how is that good policy? Like what is going on there? Because it's obvious without doing any statistical analysis, if you have these 4,000 or 5,000 medallions that are inactive, why is the debate so long about issuing new TLC plates? Is that a fair way to kind of illustrate what you're trying to say, Carolyn?
Yeah, but there really doesn't seem to be any debate. There isn't any real debate about the TLC plate issuances. They're just going to do it. And as far as the merging, Mira Zoshi in 2015 was at New York Law, and she gave this long talk about how, and the name of the talk was Taxis, Yellow, Black, and Green. I mean, already that shows where their thinking was back in 2015, because it's wrong. FHVs are not taxis. Taxis has a very specific legal meaning. But, they were already, that was like the party line, that they were going to merge everything together.
Carolyn, I would actually like to ask you, what is, in your opinion, or even Abe, you can answer this, both, I'd love to hear your guys' opinion, you've been in the industry for so long. In your mind, what is the difference between a taxi and an FHV?
Now there's hardly any difference. All that's left is the hand hail. That's it.
The only difference, right? The hand hail and where they're allowed to operate. When they did the green cars, they specifically said that they should stay out of the exclusive zone, which is below 96th Street on the east side, below 110th Street on the west side. Okay, and you know, the green taxis weren't allowed to pick up at all in any way in the exclusionary zone. But these FHVs that are basically working, you know, in the other parts of the, you know, in the north of the exclusive zone or the boroughs. Okay. Are they allowed to do to pick up, you know, by a radio call in the exclusionary zone? If so, then it contradicts what the green cars were doing.
Yeah, and I think this is where I think during this podcast, which I think people are going to really like, and again, we credit, you know, it's not easy coming on these podcasts for the regulators, and, you know, it's kind of the Wild West, you never know what questions. But at the same time, I think what I respect about Carolyn asking those hard questions is back in 2014 and 2015, you know, many, you know, people can't forget, you know, policies impact people in a real way, whether financially or socially. And so I think our role with this podcast and with everything is, you know, obviously Commissioner Doe, and he seemed open to it, you know, he has to be able to present his opinion and share his thoughts, which is, you know, we have to be fair to him. At the same time, there are difficult questions, and back in 2014 to you know, historically, we're not talking about 50 years ago. We're talking about, you know, in recent history, there were suicides. People lost a lot of money. People went bankrupt. And so those are real things, and those happen to real people. And so when this is like, these are difficult questions and not easy for the regulator to answer, but these are fundamental questions that impact everyone. And so it's very important for the TLC going forward to say, just to be kind of very simple about it, there are 4,000 to 5,000 taxi medallions that are inactive. The ones that are inactive are single shifted. There's a city loan guarantee, by the way, on many of the taxi medallions. So the city also has a fiscal fiduciary financial responsibility, is a fiduciary to those loans in many ways. And why is the subject of issuing more TLC plates even a subject? And I think that's a very fair question. And I think the industry deserves an answer to that question from someone to connect those two things.
I want to say this, you know, they can issue all the TT plates that they want, or legislate to do. But if the yellow taxis are back on the road, those 5,000 that are left, or now he said it's under 5,000, it's for 4,700, I think he said. Okay, if those cars are on the road, if those cars are on the road, the people will use them. Okay, which means that many of these plates will stay in off the road. Okay, those the FHV. Okay. The main thing is that
never stopped them before. Nothing stops them.
Yeah, but well, you know,
and
there
then,
were always
wait, and then if they start losing cars and drivers, Sarah Kaufman, the new TLC commissioner, said, "I'm going to approve licenses, you know, however, whatever, as long as they're EVs, I'm approving them."
Well, to be fair to her, she was. To be fair to, I saw that testimony. She was kind of put on. She first answered it, "I have to look into it," and then the city council kind of forced an answer out of her, so she kind of got forced into answering that way.
Girl, you're going to get with the party line, and she did. Because we still don't know where the money she's being paid is coming from, because the Rudin Institute has contributors. I don't know, some other big they say they have contributions.
Well, I think your broader point is well taken. Is that there's a lot of money, and by the way, there's a lot of money involved in the medallion industry. There's money involved in all of these things. I think where outside of the money, what everybody is solving for is drivers need to earn, fundamentally, if we go back to the Haas Act in the 1930s, everything, what this is all about, if we get back to the first principles of it,
supply
is
and demand.
Drivers, supply and demand, and solving for drivers need to earn a middle-class New York City wage.
Right, and think about it. They did the Haas Act in the middle of the Depression when there was 35% unemployment in New York City, and they did it. They put all those guys out of work. They did the right thing. Absolutely, that was the right thing. Nobody has guts like that anymore in New York City politics.
Well, because the thing is that it was the economic times have to be so dire that and there were tax rights before that too.
They made it worse for that cohort of drivers for that time. Presumably those guys went on to do something else. I don't know what they did. Maybe they joined the Army. Maybe they moved to California. I don't know what they did.
But yeah, World War II happened very shortly after.
Right.
I believe if you looked at the time, there was so much oversupply of cars that, I hope I'm historically correct on this, there was originally like 13,000 or 15,000 medallions, and there was only $5 to buy the license, and they couldn't even get demand for that, and that's why it was like 11 or 12,000 at the end of that. And so I think, like we said, and I think this podcast is going to get a lot of views, and I know the TLC. So we appreciate Chair Doe coming on, and we appreciate his answers, and we appreciate, I think all of us, he's at least driving and he's putting himself out there. He's down to earth, so I think that's a really good thing.
When you bring up congestion and New York cynicism, why are New Yorkers so cynical about their government? It's because they know that a lot of the reason for the congestion is the FHVs on the road. Of course, he's going to obfuscate and say, well, there's delivery. Well, yeah, we know there's delivery trucks, but if you got rid of 40,000 Ubers, there'd be a hell of a lot less congestion.
Okay, but on that point, one way to do it is getting rid of cars, which is much more complex. But an easy way is not to add more cars. That is a very easy thing to do, right? And right now what is going to happen? There's New York Daily News articles about it. We wrote an article basically about the allocation, and we understand that there's business interests involved, and that's fine. People have to run their businesses. But, the previous commissioner was the short-term commissioner, Aloisi. The reason she removed the EV exemption was because she was like, well, Revel's going to add hundreds of – what? They're exactly doing that. They're literally doing what she feared they would do, and they're getting allocated more and more plates. A few days ago, and so I did an article about what were the and Commissioner Doe is absolutely right. Of the 1,000 new EV plates, 80% plus went to individual drivers. The ones that didn't go to individual drivers.
How can that be when 600 was supposed to go to individuals and 400 was supposed to go to corporates? Oh, so some of those 400 corporates are individuals.
Yeah, they changed the process where the 400 became a free for all for anybody, and so. He's absolutely right. That's a factually a data proven point that those 800 plus were claimed, but the corporation ones, Hertz has claimed, and it still hasn't been fully distributed, about 50 of them. 3 days ago, look it up.
Yeah, I know it's interesting because Hertz has a relationship with Uber already. And now Hertz.
It was in the news just a few days ago. The city and Hertz has announced
that's what I'm saying.
Collaboration.
So I posted this on Twitter. Hertz has a relationship with New York City. Uber has a relationship with Hertz. New York City. So what does that mean for New York City's relationship with Uber? It's a logic exercise. It means, of course, New York City has a relationship. And
there's a whole other angle to it. Sorry, just to finish this point. If you knew that process, right, there was 100,000 applications. It is the way the process was run, it is probabilistically nearly impossible for a few entities to have gone the vast majority of the corporate allocation. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. It's still, whether it's individual or corporate, it's still too many cars. And every problem, every policy problem and issue that the TLC has attempted to solve for the last 5 or 6 years has been a problem that they themselves created. Because had they limited the number of FHVs, which they could have done just going through the rule book and enforcing their own rules, there would have been tens of thousands less cars on the road then and now. But they didn't do that.
No, let me play devil's. Let me
just finish this one thought. Because they had all those cars, it lowered driver income. It made congestion. So now you have to start all these new policies to fix the problems that you yourself created.
Can I just say
Go ahead, Ed.
My turn. You know, in 2015, the city council was about to put a cap on Uber, and Governor Cuomo came running down like a boy who lost something, and said and put a stop to it. Okay, now you gotta say one thing. What if that didn't happen that day? What if they did put the cap on it? You can't blame the TLC for this.
You almost went into my brain. You beat me to the punch. That's exactly the point I was going to make, where the de Blasio at the time, and Abe's absolutely right, he was ready to act on capping the cars in 2015, and I believe a council bill was passed, and then so they understood what was going on, but the TLC is also a organization of the broader, the city council obviously sits above in many ways the TLC, and the Department of Transportation sits above the TLC as well. So they also, if the mayor is saying this is how it needs to be, the TLC, the TLC is it's a very tricky thing for the TLC to act in a different way than the city council.
De Blasio sent a signal by going to Italy. He was out of the country when this was happening. That's a signal.
But it was Cuomo.
I can't help it. It wasn't just one person.
Cuomo.
You can't. Yeah. All right, so it was Cuomo, but it was the whole city council, basically. And it is the TLC's fault because they didn't enforce their own rules. One of the city council members said it at the time. We don't need any more damn rules. We got enough rules. Just enforce the rules you have now, and that takes care of the problem. And it always would.
And I think from both of your perspectives, and I think it's. I just want to say one more thing. I know we may have to end soon, but I just want to add one more thing. I think and I'm not in this position, but both of you were in this position. I think why it's so, maybe the word is vitriolic, and people listening might say, well, why are they so upset about this, especially on the Uber and Lyft side? I think many people forgot how much money was lost and how much mental strain, mental, health issues arose out of the medallion crisis.
We're talking about at least $10 billion. $10 billion disappeared.
Listen, let me talk. Dawood, the other day we were on the phone together, okay, offline, okay, and you said that you thought that there was going to be financing coming into the yellow industry. Do you want to say how you got that information, and is it real? Is it really going to happen? Do you know?
So there's as we've been covering, and we'll talk about on this podcast as well in the future. There's an auction coming up in 3 days for 10 NYC taxi medallions that are effectively controlled, it seems like, by Marblegate, and there's different ways to try to figure that out. I think as Marblegate prepares to list its medallion portfolio to Wall Street, I think Wall Street wants to understand, well, is there a market for taxi medallions? They need an update on, what is the valuation and, what's going on, because it's been in an ice age, basically, and so they want to understand what's going on. And so this all relates to the questions we've been asking here. If you're a guy, let's say you're a bank, right? And all the credit unions obviously have gone bust, who use Melrose, and there's a few others that you probably, Progressive, I think, or I think even Signature was big in the tax medallion industry. They're literally have gone, that's not even an overstatement. They literally don't exist anymore.
Right.
And so they've gone bust, so the financing has dried up. So right now, the current state of medallion financing is there's a lot of seller financing going on. And how I get this information is talking to the biggest taxi medallion brokers. I believe right now there's only there's like maybe 12 licensed brokers, but in reality, just a handful are doing the vast majority of the transactions. And
Right.
So seller financing is coming back. And what seller financing means is, let's say Medallion Financial has a medallion that they control. They'll say, get this off my hands and I'll give you 80% financing. They just want to they've already marked it down to zero, but they just want to get rid of it. So that's starting to come back in.
So some of the medallions are were foreclosed on by Medallion Financial, and these are some of the medallions that are on the shelf maybe. Is that correct?
Exactly. And based on my analysis, so using this Marblegate auction, and basically you have to make in order to participate in the auction, we covered this, that you have to pay $10,000 to Diploma Acquisition 1, which it's really Marblegate. And so if you look at the insurance record, of those 10 medallions, 3 of them have active insurance, which kind of implies that those 3 are on the road and the other 7 are in storage. This is that is the question, Abe, you just asked, is the question. Even someone from Uber emailed me recently asking that question. Like, do you know who owns the 4,000 or 5,000 medallions? Like, everybody is confused and asking
maybe
that
Uber
exact
would like
question.
to buy, or maybe Uber would like to buy these medallions and put them on the road.
Well,
Okay.
if you remember back before the 2018 cap, I believe they made an offer, Uber and Lyft, for like $100 million.
Yes,
Yeah.
100 million. Yeah.
100 million or something like that. So whether they want to, I think people are just trying to figure out why aren't these things coming back on the road? Because if you look at Yellow Cab earnings, they're actually very good right now because there's 4,000 or 5,000 on the sideline. And to your point, Abe, if you put the 5,000 on the road, they're going to be active. They're not going to get 0 trips. There's a demand for them. But why aren't they being active? Because they're in foreclosure proceedings. And so right now, what Marblegate, the importance of Marblegate and all of this is these guys. Now, a lot of people say, well, they're a hedge fund and this and that. Okay, I get it. At the same time, they're distressed investment firms. So they bought into the industry when no one was buying into the industry. It's not like they caused the bubble. In fact, they're the ones who, caught the bubble, the pop, if you will, at the bottom. And so what they're trying to probably prove to Wall Street is saying, guys, there's an industry here. We'll prove it to you. We'll sell 10. Let's list the medallion portfolio. But at the same time, Wall Street guys aren't dumb. They're going to say, okay, you've proven to us that there's an industry, but what if the TLC just issues 10,000 more TLC plates?
Yeah.
I don't want to touch this medallion thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's where people aren't connecting the dots. And, from a finance background, if I'm on Wall Street, if I'm sitting in a hedge fund, I got capital to deploy, they'll be like, this medallion thing is interesting. But man, is the city going to issue more TLC plates? Are they not going to? I can't invest in this if I have no regulatory certainty.
And it's the sword of Damocles, because it's dangling over everybody's head that every 12 months we're going to sit down and figure out how many plates we're going to issue. And actually, these new plates that they've been issuing, they did in between the times when they're supposed to actually sit down and look at the market and figure it out.
Look, today is Monday. This auction is happening on Thursday. Correct? Okay.
Correct.
So we're trying to see the future here, and you can't see the future. Okay.
That's true. That's true. Listen, guys, great conversation.
Yeah.
Really great questions, and let's do it again soon. At least us three.
I want to thank David Doe for coming on. Okay, and saying he'd like to come back. Okay, I think he enjoyed it. All right, which is good. All right, like I said to him, he's the only one out of all of the commissioners that have ever been on the TLC. He's the only one that has brought himself down to the level that we're human beings just like him. Okay?
He should be given credit for that, undoubtedly.
Yeah. And let's wait until after the auction. Let's see what happens. Okay, and let's see if it's possible nobody might show up for the auction. Okay, and if nobody does, that's something to read also. All right, or some people might quote, the bid amounts of money that shows that the industry is still healthy. So let's just see. Let's wait. Let's do another podcast in 3 or 4 weeks. Okay. All right.
Sounds great.
And Dawood, you're becoming a regular here, and we like that. Okay. And Carolyn,
I appreciate. I enjoy. There are very few people who know the taxi, who know the specifics. Yeah. So thanks for I enjoy this. So I hope you guys enjoy me being on too.
Yeah. No, I like doing it also. And Carolyn,
we do.
You're the brains that run the show.
Without wallowing in the past and thinking you're going to bring back the past, because we're not going to bring back the Soviet Union and we're not going to bring back the old taxi industry. We realize that. But you have to understand the history to see the behavior patterns of the people who are making the decisions for over these 10 years or so, to understand why we are where we are now. And, possibly
that's a very fair statement. That's a very fair statement. Yeah.
That's true.
And mostly you need to do policies to make things better for New York City. Forget about taxi drivers. I mean, you have to do things for the city, and I don't think they're doing things in the best interest of New York City now.
The taxi drivers are part of the city.
Right.
Okay. Just like the MTA and everyone else that does these services. Okay.
But
okay.
We'll remind.
Okay. My
okay.
No, I really enjoyed this, guys.
Bye.
I know, and I guess Abe has to go. So okay, thanks a lot, guys. We'll talk soon.